Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, a podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to give our hot take on the game we just finished playing, Lacrimosa.
We'll also be talking about a game that was on our table this week, One Deck Galaxy. All right, let's move into our poll. Every week, we ask a poll on social media, on Twitter, and on our Facebook group. You can find us at BG_Hot Takes on Twitter, or you can just search for us in Facebook groups and find us at Board Game Hot Takes. But we asked a poll this week. Do you prefer if a board game leaves space for future expansions, or do you want the base game to fit snugly in the smallest box size possible? How'd you guys answer this poll?
Tim, I think I said all your answers were dumb, like I always say. And I think I said I want everything to fit in one box. And then I thought about it more, and I read some of the responses. I was like, you know what? Just give me the minimum size box that I need for the components, because I don't know if I'm going to want the expansion. I don't know if your expansion is going to be some money grab that I don't even want to play that like makes the base game even worse already. Just give me the minimum amount I need to hold all the components inside one little box. Don't waste any cardboard. Don't waste any plastic. Don't waste any stuff. Bring this game to me. Just give me the minimum that I need to fit your game in there and make your rulebook good.
Man, spoken like somebody from Southern California where real estate is like $1 million a square foot. I live out in the country. I could care less about box size. What I do care about is games that don't fit in the damn box. I have games where even like the base game in the base game box doesn't fit. And yeah, I'm looking at you, Awaken Realms. And there are games, Awaken Realms again is a perpetrator of this, where even if I take the little plastic inserts and stuff out of it, I still can't get all the stuff to fit in the base game box. So my feeling on this is a bigger the box, the better. I want plenty of space. I don't want to have to mess around. I don't want to have lid lift. Oh, man, that stuff drives me crazy. So for me, more space, the better.
Well, this was a very tight poll from our listeners. On Twitter, 51.3% said leave some room, and 48.7% said smallest box possible. On Facebook, it was a little bit more shifted. 64% said leave some room for expansions, and 36% said smallest box possible. Now, I got some great responses this week. This was apparently a very contentious issue. A lot of chatter about this. So again, if you want to check out some more answers, go find us on Twitter at BG_Hot Takes. I'm going to read a few of them here. Board Game Dojo said, I want the smallest box possible. Maybe it's because we have a small place, but I like a box that doesn't take more room than it needs. Besides, I don't want the publisher assuming I'm going to be buying the expansions. Shouldn't the base game be fun enough? All Games New and Old said, honestly, if the box is too small, it's going to be put somewhere and be forgotten. I won't be satisfied until the mine comes in a Gloomhaven size box.
Nicely said. Nicely said.
Jacob Long said, this is a hard one. I want the best of both worlds. Maybe if the expansion came with a box that fit the base game. Actually, a lot of people gave an answer kind of like this. So this was a pretty common response saying, hey, send me the base game in the smallest box possible. But if you send me an expansion, then send it in a larger box. So you could move the base game into it. I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe it's okay. I feel like if I've got to put my base game into the expansion box with the expansion name on it, that feels like it cheapens the experience a little bit. Like I either want the base game box with the original title, or I want some like upgraded box to fit everything that's like new artwork, but just with the original title. I don't want an expansion name on a box. So I disagree with that answer, but I can see where people are coming from. Practically, I think that's a reasonable solution, but I don't like the aesthetic of having an expansion name on my box. Stefan Gostwicki on Facebook said, such a high percentage of games have expansions, I prefer more room. I have no problem whatsoever putting everything in the base game box and chucking the expansion box. It actually saves room in the long term. This is kind of how I feel. Like, I don't need to expect to buy an expansion, but it is really frustrating when I buy an expansion for a game and it doesn't fit in the base game box. So I would rather have that opportunity, just a little bit extra space, not a huge open box, not like Splendor where you have a tiny amount of components and a big insert that takes up all the space and then just mostly air. We don't need to do that, but a little bit more space. And this kind of speaks to this. Andrew V said, Garfield tiny boxes should have been banished after Architects. I love those tiny Garphill boxes until I wanted to get expansions for the games, and then they were so sad and frustrating. So, yeah, I'm kind of on board with you there. I like the smallest box that you can fit things in. I think that's really fun when it's compact. Dinah Said So said, not all games need an expansion. Okay, fair enough. That's true. That's true. But what about the ones that do need an expansion? Do you think about that? And then Aaron over at Boards Alive said, I'm at a 1-to-1 basis on my collection, so the smaller and tighter the box, the better for me. Also, most expansions are just extra fluff and not necessary. Aaron, I would love to have a conversation with you about this at some point because I don't necessarily agree with you on that. I think there are some really, really amazing expansions that have really improved games. But yeah, maybe some are like that. Okay, this is the last comment I'm going to read, but a lot of other people commented similarly, and I'm going to argue. I'm going to fight you guys to the death here. Ode said, I want designers and publishers to think of the best game possible for one release and put it in one box. End of story. No expansions, no thinking about what comes next or any other stuff like that. Okay, I am pretty confident that 95% of the games that are published, they don't plan for expansions. They don't hold content back. They make the best game that they think they can. I've listened to a lot of interviews with publishers. I've spoken and designers. I've spoken to a few of them, and usually they think that they're putting out the best game they can. Expansions often come from then thousands of people playing their game and having feedback saying, hey, I didn't like this part about it. I like this part. And so expansions tend to be there to fix things. The other thing that can happen sometimes is that a game is just super popular and all of a sudden, hey, this designer might actually make some money on a game. Maybe they could put out some more content for it. I don't think that's a bad thing either. The vast majority of games there was like, I think 5,000 games that came out in 2022 that were published in 2022. And probably like, I don't know what, 20 of them are going to get expansions because the vast majority of them will not sell enough copies for the publishers to, to put out more content for it. So I don't think that designers or publishers are thinking about a game and saying, hey, I'm going to hold this content back and I'm going to change it later on people. I think most of the time, this is an iterative process. This is a small industry. These are people that are just trying their best to put out something cool for me to play. So I don't really like this sentiment, but there was quite a few people that responded saying that they felt like publishers were actually just holding content back.
I can see this sentiment because you look at Kickstarter and they're like, hey, buy this base game for $80. And then, oh, don't forget to throw in this expansion for $10 and this expansion for $10. Oh, you can also add this little, you can get these 3 promo cards for another $5. And then add this thing, add this other thing. And like 12 boxes later, you're like, what am I supposed to play here? Why is all this extra stuff? So try to stay away from those types of Kickstarters because it seems like more of a money grab situation. And what kind of game are you getting anyway if it needs all these other expansions to be thrown in? I don't know, but I can see that perspective of frustration when you just want to play this game, but there's like 13 other expansions and you don't have to deal with that crap. So I get it.
Well, let me throw out a counterpoint where a situation where I think the publisher actually did go into it intending to put out expansion content later, but that it doesn't really bother me. And that's Wingspan by Stonemaier Games. And that's one where I don't know what the backstory is. Maybe they did intend to just put out the base game, which has the North American birds, but now they're putting out one expansion for each continent. So now we're up to 3 or 4. We did Europe and Oceania and now Asia. And my understanding, or at least the way it looks to me, is that that was intended. And that doesn't bother me, though, because I'm not sure that most people would want to spend the, I don't know, $150 that it takes to buy this giant box with 1,000 different cards in it. Rather, it's a game where you get the base game, and what you're just adding is more of similar content throughout all the different expansions. So if you're someone who's a casual player who wants to play it once in a while, maybe the base game is good enough. Or if you're someone who really likes to play it and wants that variety, you throw in a couple of packs. It's sort of like, I mean, probably a bad comparison, but Magic the Gathering, you don't get a base deck and then, that's all you ever do. You expand over time and you get more cards so that you can change your game up. So I feel like that's a little bit similar to what they're doing there.
Yeah, okay. There are probably some publishers that at least thought if this is successful, we'll make some expansions for it. In a similar vein, Stonemaier Games said about Tapestry that when they published it, they basically designed the best game they thought they could, but they got a lot of feedback. They got a lot of like pushback on some of the mechanisms and things. And so they add things in in the expansion to try to fix the game or make it a more enjoyable experience for people, for people that didn't enjoy the first experience. And so that's kind of a similar situation. Someone like Fantasy Flight, right, with their card game systems like Arkham Horror, the card game, or Marble Champions, right? Those were intended to be like sell ongoing content. So there are some games that are put out like that. But I think the majority, if you think of like most Euros, like Stefan Feld isn't making a game and saying, hey, I'm going to put out Cast of Burgundy, but I'm going to hold back the Trade Routes expansion because I think that's going to be way cool to add as a later on add-on. No, I think that he made a game, one mechanism kind of didn't fit well, and players recognize that, and they said, hey, we didn't like this mechanism. Say, well, let me think about one little thing that would help fix that thing. I think that's how most game designers and most publishers are looking at game content. Adam, as far as Kickstarters go, okay, that's fair. If somebody's looking at Kickstarters all the time and seeing all these big, huge plastic minis, these come on game things where it's like, yeah, you can buy this, but you have to buy all this add-on content. It's going to be $300 before you actually get the game, and you're going to have 5 different boxes with it. Okay, I wasn't thinking about that because I don't typically buy those types of games or watch for them. But I could see if somebody's occasionally, okay, I saw that look you gave me. Occasionally, I have bought that, but I can see that. I wasn't thinking about that when I was going on my rant about this. So I apologize if you're somebody who is watching those types of games and seeing all that stuff put out right when the game is out on Kickstarter. I agree. There are some publishers that are doing that. I wouldn't recommend purchasing those games on Kickstarter with all the expansions because they're probably not that great and you're probably never going to get to them in the first place. But if you're buying a typical game off the shelf, first time game, first in a line, typical designer, most likely they're trying to make the best game they can. The expansions might be a bonus that if you really love the game, you can add into it or shift it up a little bit later. Let's jump into a description of Lacrimosa.
So, it's December 5th, 1791. Vienna, Austria. The brilliant composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart lies on his deathbed, clutching his quill and paper. He frowns at the paper, which contains one small piece of his Requiem in D minor. He scrawls the first 8 bars of the Lacrimosa movement of his great opus, then slowly drops his pen, and his eyes close forever. And that, my friends, is the setup for the game of Lacrimosa, in which 1 to 4 players step into the roles of wealthy patrons attempting to please Mozart's widow, Constance, by securing the services of the still-living maestros of the day to finish her late husband's work. The players will strive to be the most influential patron, hiring the finest composers and gaining influence by impressing Constance with their taste and dedication to Mozart's work. The game takes place over a series of 5 rounds, or movements, with each round divided up into 4 turns per player. On each turn, the player will play 2 of their multi-purpose cards, one for the action that they'll take that turn, and one for scoring or production that will occur at the end of the round during the maintenance phase. And each card can fill either of these requirements, so players are deciding both which card to play and how it will be played. As their main action, players have multiple choices, including purchasing new cards to upgrade their deck, commissioning opuses to score points, performing or selling music for points and cash, traveling around the shared main board to claim benefits and bonuses, or contributing elements to the Requiem in D minor, which is at the center of the game. Carrying out this last action, there's also a Requiem board in which players will assert their influence over how the masterpiece is completed and by which composer, leading to big point-scoring opportunities at the end of the game. After the 5th round, players will score their own individual cards as well as contributions to the Requiem, and the player with the most points will be the winner. Lacrimosa was designed by Gerard Asensi and Ferran Renelius and is published by De Vere Games.
All right, thanks, Chris, for that description. So let's talk about the gameplay and mechanisms of Lacrimosa. This was our first play tonight. We played on Tabletop Simulator, a 4-player game. Let's jump right in here. So I think the most interesting set of mechanisms here has to do with the area control of actually composing the Requiem. I thought that was really fascinating. A couple things going on. There's a scarcity of which instruments can be used in each movement. The movements have different area control points for them. There's an interesting decision about which of the 2 composers that are going to be working on this Requiem as far as who you're going to back and which points you're going to get from them depending on the majority that show up in the thing. And there's an interesting decision about when you take one of these Requiem actions and compose on that section, you're going to get a bonus from your main board. And so it's a variety of really interesting decisions. I thought it was fascinating. I thought it created a lot of fun interaction, watching what other people are trying to do, trying to outwit them as far as how you played these. The earlier you go in these different regions, the cheaper the actions are to get the benefits from them. So you can kind of take them early and try to make other people pay more money for them. A lot of fascinating stuff going on with the Requiem action. I thought that was really cool.
I agree totally, Tim. It's really composition control is what you're fighting for here. Who's going to write the horn section? Who's going to write the Tim Finney section? There's all these different components of this composition that you're writing for, the different movements. I'm fading into theme here a little bit, but I can't wait till we get fully into that. I'm going to talk about the card play here. I thought that was a fascinating mechanism as well. These cards, like Chris said, have dual purposes. You can play them for the top action, or you can put them on the bottom of your board for the bottom action, which acts like an income. So that's part of the decision of this game. What do I want to do with this card? Am I going to use this to perform my opus or sell my opus? And then I'm going to put this one at the bottom. That'll get me some icons, some tags, some resources to help me in the next round. Or guess what? I don't really want this card anymore. I'm going to put it at the bottom. I'm going to buy a great card that's going to update this bottom action. And I get to use that at the end of this round. So I thought that was neat. Later in the game, you got some cards that give you 2 or 3 or 4, a bunch of stuff at the bottom of it. You can get points. You can get, we don't call them little profile icons, little ink blot icons, all these different things. A little bit like Dune Imperium does with the reveal phase, where you're throwing the rest of your cards out there and you're collecting the stuff along the bottom of those cards. I liked the way that played out here in Lacrimosa.
I want to touch on a little bit of what you guys both said, because I think you both highlighted really interesting parts of the game. First, the Requiem. That was a particularly interesting area control mechanism. I don't think I've seen anything quite like that before. And one of the things that I enjoyed was that it wasn't straight area control. Someone gets screwed and someone does really well. Essentially, what you're doing is you're deciding who is going to be the composer of the two that are in the game, who's going to have the most influence over that section. And anybody who put in a token for that composer is going to benefit from the area majority for that composer. So, for example, in one section, you had 3 points would go per token to the person who had less influence and 6 points toward the person who had more. So all 4 of us may have had tokens in that particular movement. And for each of those tokens, we're all going to get paid. And I might have had tokens for the majority composer and for the minority composer. So you really could switch it up. And it really wasn't a zero-sum game, that you really could spread that wealth around. And it allowed you to make some clever little decisions about how you're going to place your tokens. You may decide you want to go one way, and then you might decide you want to go another way and put the other composer down. So I thought that added some interesting variability. In terms of the card play, I really like that. There's a deck building aspect to this game, which is, I'd say it's subtle. Subtle is probably the wrong word, but it's not straight deck builder like a lot of the games that we've played before, including last week's Tyrants of the Underdark. Here, you're using those cards to take your actions, but it's really less about building up the deck as it is about improving the minimal deck that you have, because you're never going to have more cards. You're not pulling new cards into your deck and then making your deck bigger and bigger. You are really, every time you take a card into your deck, you're getting rid of something else, and you have to be careful what you're getting rid of, because you may find yourself ditching some actions that you may want to take later. So I thought that was an interesting twist on deck building. I did terrible with it. I don't think I built my deck up at all throughout this game, and I was frustrated, and no fault of the game. I mean, I could have spent more time and energy building up my cards and doing some killer moves at the end, but I didn't. But if I were to play this again, I would absolutely be paying more attention to that, because I thought it was a really fun part of the game, potentially, if you do it right.
Yeah, and I thought that was one of the challenges with the game, right? You only had 4 actions per round, like 4 basic actions you're going to take. And doing the deck building means you're giving up some other action. You're not getting involved in the composition. You're not moving around. You're not buying an opus. or commissioning an opus, I guess. You're not activating one of your opuses. And so doing that was a tough decision. If you did it once per round, you've just given up five of your actions over the course of the game. But it was a fun decision. And I did give you some pretty strong benefits, because a lot of the cards you would upgrade would actually give you 2 actions at a later time and sometimes some other benefit. And then the bottom part of those cards, in some cases, which I didn't realize until I saw people taking advantage of them, is they might give you some points during income as well. And that was cool to see. So cool choice there. I want to jump to one other action that I thought was great, and that was the travel action here. And the travel action is pretty cool because you can spend this travel action. You spend coins to move between different areas of this map in Europe. And when you move, then you can take advantage of the benefit that's on the tile. And these are randomly seeded tiles that are on the board. Some of them will just give you a one-time benefit if you pay some little wheel story points for them. Or they could give you endgame scoring, which give you some goals to work towards, maybe gather up some opuses or do some other things. But what was cool about this, not only is that they're randomly seeded, but at the end of the round, you would replace any that had been taken, and then you would flip over the ones that had not been taken, so they got a little bit stronger. So, all of that was cool. It's going to lead to a very different situation, different opportunities, different things that are come up. Now, I did notice that by the end of the game, we actually had to reshuffle and reuse some of the tiles. So they weren't so variable that you wouldn't, you're always going to see all of them as far as I could tell, at least in a 4-player game. Maybe in lower player counts, you wouldn't see all of them. But it was still fun to see that play out differently. Every turn, based on where the little Mozart character was, you only had 1 or 2 different directions you could go. And so it kind of gave you just like a new action selection. Like, I'm going to take that action, which is going to give me this benefit. I always like games that kind of give you that variable action that's going to shift over the course of the game. And I think that's what the travel action did. So that was fun for me.
Yeah, I don't know about the travel action, Tim. It seemed a little lackluster to me. It was all right. You put it as having another option for an action selection. Yeah, I could see that. But it seems to me just like an excuse to have a map and make somebody move around. Some of the in-game scoring tiles that you could get from there, this is just a first play, so they didn't seem too extra awesome. I don't know. So I was a little down on the travel action in this game. What about you, Chris?
We can't call it a Euro without a map in
I know,
Europe,
right?
can we?
That's a good point.
I'm not sure which of you guys I agree with, because I think I agree with each of you a little bit. I think that the map had the capacity to be really interesting. It didn't end up being particularly interesting, and that might have been because of the kind of strategies we were using. Maybe you could have expanded on it better, but I liked it. I mean, I wanted it to be better. I wanted to do more stuff with it, but I just didn't. I don't know. The strategy there just didn't jump out at me. But maybe on a first play, it wouldn't, because I haven't played it more than once. But I'm interested to go back and check that out. And it's just one of several strategies. I mean, you can spend your time moving around the board and picking up these in-game scoring tiles. You can spend your game updating your cards and making them more and more powerful to do various things. You can spend your time getting the area control. So there's different ways to score points here, and that's just one of them.
The one last action we haven't talked about is the opportunity to commission opuses, which are some cards that are going to come up in a random market at the top of the board. And they're going to be mixed in with I figure they're called memory cards. That's what upgrades your deck. But the opuses are cards that are going to go down at the bottom of your, kind of the side of your tableau. It's kind of a little bit of a tableau you can build up. And then you have another card, another action that will either allow you to activate that opus, meaning you're basically putting on a musical performance and you're going to tap it to get some income, usually some money, or you can just then sell that commission, that commissioned opus, and you can get usually some income on your income track or some other benefit. It was fun. It was some interesting decisions. A lot of those opuses triggered some of the end game scoring points or some of the travel benefits you could get. So depending on which type of opus you commissioned, they could have some other impact. So you did have to pay attention to them a lot. The one last thing I'll say about it is that the trigger, there's this little income track on the side of your board that as it goes up at the end of the round, you can get more income, which it could result in coins, it could result in some story point tokens, and it could result in end game points. And usually you would get those by selling opuses. That was the best way to increase your income. But you would lose income on many of the Requiem actions. Like if you took a Requiem in a particularly valuable area, you'd usually lose income on that. So that was an interesting push and pull. I ended up in the game with like almost no income, while Steve had a pretty high income and was getting lots of points on it by the end of the game. So some clearly different strategies you could go after.
Yeah, I wish I'd realized this Opus usage earlier in the game. I think it started clicking for me around 3 or around 3.5, around 4. Oh man, I could use these. I could work up that income track. And I thought that was nice. The whole market row was cool to me. The deck's seeded for how that market comes out. So they get more powerful as the game goes on and apply like you would expect them to. In-game cards are worth more points, whereas early game cards might be worth more income. I thought that was a nice flow of how those come out. And I thought that was a very interesting, I don't know if you would call it a mechanism, just a key aspect of this game were those Opus cards and how to manage those and how to use them. I thought that was very neat.
Yeah, and like any good Euro, the economy was just too freaking tight in this game. I kept seeing these cards come up, the Opuses and the memory cards, and I kept looking at them going, "Oh man, I want those cards. I want the big actions. I want to pick up that Opus card because that's going to get me some end game scoring if I'm able to move over to Paris and pick up a royalty tile." And I ended up flailing around just like, looking at all these different things and wishing I had them and not getting them. And in the meantime, Steve was over there. I don't know how he did it, but he spent a lot of time at the beginning of the game really focused on his income. And then he started blasting through the Requiem and owned us on the Requiem and on the income. And it was a very decisive win for Steve on that one. So I don't know. He managed to crack the code really quickly, but I feel like I would have to go back and play at least another game or two to really feel like I was getting a handle on what the options were in this game. But it was interesting stuff to try to figure out.
All right, well, let's jump into the theme and production of Lacrimosa. I think this is one of the more interesting and I'm going to say well executed themes. I think Chris might disagree with me here, but I really enjoyed what the story was that was being told here, what they tried to do, thematically to tie into the mechanisms. Really fascinating. Basically, the concept that Mozart just died. He was in the middle of writing his final requiem, and his wife decides that she wants to work with some of his old sponsors to try to get the requiem finished. And so the idea is that each of you are sponsors of Mozart, past sponsors that had spent time with him, that had been around him, and you're sitting down with his wife and sharing memories. And so all of the actions you're taking are basically sharing memories, or the one action of actually composing the requiem, where you're kind of commissioning to get the requiem composed and finished. And I thought that was fascinating. Now, like we talked about in our thematic, tie-in episode a couple weeks ago, everything doesn't fit perfectly, right? You've got to abstract some stuff. But I did like what they were trying to do here. And I like the concept of you sitting around telling stories of the past with the actions you're taking today. I thought that was pretty cool.
Agreed, Tim. The theme here and the art seems to all just fit perfectly. I'm going to talk about that sheet music section, the area control, area majority, composition majority. You've got treble clefs and bass clefs, and there's pipe organs in the bass clef, kettle drums. It looked like ramen noodle soup. That doesn't really make sense to me. It's sheet music, right? And you are trying to be the first to compose these different parts of the Requiem and get a lockdown on this certain movement. You've got the 5 movements here listed out. Do you want to concentrate on that first movement and catch everybody's attention right up front? Or do you want to round out with the triumphant end or the sad end? Or do you want to be that part of that exciting 4th movement where all the, the fanfare is going to be about that. And the commotion is going to be talking about this. And that's where a lot of the points are going to come from. So just the different ways that you can manipulate that sheet music down there, I thought was fantastic. And that really got me pumped about this game.
So Tim may be surprised, but I actually agree with you, Tim, on the theme for this game. Now, I will also say that there are some weirdnesses going on here. There's some real head scratchers. I mean, you're sitting down and telling stories to Mozart's widow, so she'll let you give her money to make the opus. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on there that doesn't exactly make sense to me. But strangely, even though I felt that way, I also felt like I was sitting through a story that was surprisingly effective in terms of its thematic integration. I was honestly really surprised by that. I mean, when I first saw this game, I thought that looks a little bit cool, but honestly, I think I'm going to be really let down by the theme. But by the end of it, especially after having done a little bit of reading and understanding the circumstances around this Requiem, it was actually quite nicely done. The production itself, the physical production, I mean, it's a bunch of cards and probably some chits. We played it on Tabletop Simulator, so I'm not sure exactly, but I mean, I can tell you there's not a lot of minis and stuff, and you wouldn't need that anyway for this kind of a game. What it did look like is that you've got these very nice dual layer boards or 3-layer boards that you slot the cards in and out of, because you're taking these actions where you're either placing the card in the top of the slot and using one half of the card, or putting it in the bottom slot and using the other half of the card. And it looks like that's done very nicely from what I saw on the rules video that I watched. So I think that's probably very nice. The art, it's what you'd expect. I mean, it's kind of 17th or 18th century looking European people in, big white wigs and stuff. And I mean, if you like that, that's cool. I thought it got the job done. It certainly wasn't unpleasant, and I thought it carried the theme just fine.
Yeah, it's funny because we often rail on these games about having just like a map of Europe, pre-industrial Europe. And that's what we have here, is a map of pre-industrial Europe. But the difference is that we're talking about creating art. We're not talking about commerce. We're not talking about industrialization. We're not talking about survival. We're talking about creating art. And that's a whole different world, right? That's where, Europe, the history of Europe shines. We get so much beautiful and wonderful works of art from, early Western civilization. And this is a great example of bringing that thematically to life. Now, Devere Games, I've had a chance to play 2 of their other games. I played Red Cathedral and I played Bitoku. Both of those were just some amazing production. So this is it goes right along with it. I think the box cover for this game is just gorgeous. It's one of the coolest looking box covers I've ever seen. And they just made a really wonderful production here. So this is my, just to spoil my thoughts a little bit, this is my favorite of Devere's games mechanically. Like, this was my favorite of their games to play. But from a production perspective, all of them have been hits. They've done great components, great productions, and this is right on track there. So I'm just going to expect this from Devere in the future. If you play a Devere game, expect it to have a really cool production, really thematic artwork and style, and Lacrimosa is right there with the rest of them.
Another thing I want to talk about with the theme, all these different opuses, if that's the right word even, I don't know. But they have...
I think it's opis.
Opiums. That's probably not right. They have the name of the song that was, I believe, composed by Mozart. So if you're familiar with his works, you might recognize some of these, be like, oh, I know this song, I know this one. Or maybe we'll Google them and listen to them, and then hear what they sound like. You'll probably recognize them then.
Yeah, I totally thought that Kyrie was by Mr. not by Mozart.
It's a common mistake.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into the final question, and that is, would you request to play this game? And I'll also just mention that I just realized that I was using my laptop mic through all of that, so I apologize to everyone for the terrible audio that you've heard till now. Hopefully it's a little bit better. So I'll start with this answer, and yeah, I really like this game a lot. It was really fun for me. I think if I was to sit down and teach this to somebody, it wouldn't even be that hard to teach, even though there was a lot of iconography. It was a little challenge to learn out of the rule book or off a learning video, but I think this could be taught pretty easily. And once we were all playing it, it felt like it ran pretty quickly to me. I thought I had a pretty clear options to take. The turns went quickly. So I would request to play Lacrimosa again.
I agree with you, Tim. I would absolutely request to play this one again. It made sense, not right away, but a lot more than like Carnegie did, or some of the other games, Teotihuacan. That one was okay, but this one, after the first round, it started clicking for me, and it made sense. The way the action selection works, the production is beautiful. The way you slot these cards in is amazing. The sheet music at the bottom, I love it. Putting these tokens out, everything's beautifully presented. I love having a market row up there. I want to figure out how to make some of these cards combo up a little better and explode my economy and not feel like I'm so tightened up. I want to have the freedom and the options to compose the entire Requiem and visit all of Europe and buy all the cards. And I don't think that'll ever happen, but I want to try to do it in this game. Enjoy this one very much after first.
So this game was my pick tonight. And my first thought when I have a game night where I get to pick, it's usually, what big heavy hitter, area control game can I throw down on the table? But I didn't want to do that this week because we're coming up on our games I want to play in the New Year episode. And I wanted to save a bunch of those for that. So I purposely was looking for something that I wasn't that enthusiastic about. But then we played this game, and I am actually really enthusiastic about it now. It was a really pleasant surprise for me. It wasn't a perfect game. I mean, there were things in there that, like with any game, it's going to have things that were, some things were exciting, some things were not. But overall, my impression of this game was very positive. I'm with Adam. I want to find ways where you can combo those cards up and get those big actions happening. I didn't do it this game, so I want to get back to it, and I want to try to, I want to crack that code. I want to figure out how to really dig into that Requiem and get my tokens in there and dominate that thing, especially with the choir. I can't believe I didn't get my choir in there. I want to explore this one more. I want to check it out, and I want to learn it. I want to become a master at it. It was a lot of fun. On top of the interesting mechanisms, I thought it also came with a really healthy dose of theme. And if you can find a Euro-style game that has good mechanisms and it can also throw in a really interesting theme, that's a winner in my book.
All right, right on. Well, let's jump into a Lacrimosa themed cocktail and a game we've had on our table right after this. All right, welcome back, Chris. What are we drinking in 17th century Europe?
Well, history suggests to us that Constance Mozart was quite the wheeler dealer, and she was also a bit of a raconteur. So there's a lot of really interesting stories that surround the Requiem in D minor. And it doesn't help that it carries such a significant spot in Mozart's canon. I mean, this is literally the Requiem that he wrote on his deathbed. The one story that she told, which I'm not sure if it's verified or not, but it's particularly beguiling. As the legend goes, the commission for this piece was delivered by a mysterious messenger who claimed to represent a man of great importance. And he came not only with the commission, but with a warning, not to go looking for the identity of the benefactor. So this mystery fueled Mozart's imagination, and according to Constance, Mozart became convinced that the messenger was, and I am sort of paraphrasing here a bit, but an angel of death, and that Mozart had been cursed to write his own Requiem. I mean, true or not, that is a great story, and it's the kind of thing that makes artistic history so fascinating. And it's why I'd like to dedicate this week's themed cocktail to the mysterious messenger who brought Mozart his final commission. But tonight's drink also lets me continue indulging in my recent fascination with punches, which feels like a seasonal favorite to me, even if they don't actually have anything to do with the holiday season. So this week's drink is the Messenger Punch, which was created by bartender Jason Luttrell and cocktail blogger Hal Wolin, and comes to us courtesy of foodandwine.com. Now, like any good punch, this one has a combination of fun fruit juices and soda, but it also has a couple of special touches that scratch my itch for tropical cocktails. An almond syrup called orgeat and a mixture of spices that are commonly used in tiki drinks. And unlike last week's punch that had a base of spiced rum, the Messenger Punch uses apple brandy, which is always fun for a change in your base liquor. So this one's a little more complex than a lot of the cocktails that I share with you folks, but if you're up for a little adventure, this punch is a great choice. It's also got some serious alcohol bite, so be careful. Don't drink too many of these, or you never know what kind of messenger might come knocking on your door.
And if you have not seen the 1980s film Amadeus, it gives you a little bit of hint of who that mysterious messenger might have been. It sounds really good, Chris. Thanks for that little bit of history. That was great. Well, let's jump into one game this week that all three of us have had on our table. This is kind of a unique thing for us, and that all three of us got a Kickstarter delivered. Probably the first and only Kickstarter that we've all purchased and had delivered. And we all got a chance to get it on the table, try to learn it, and play it a little bit this week. And that is One Deck Galaxy. This is by Asmati Games and Chris Suzlik, the designer of One Deck Dungeon, which was kind of the predecessor to One Deck Galaxy. So I'm going to start just by telling a little bit about the difference between the two games, because I'm the only one of us that has actually played One Deck Dungeon. And when I read the description of One Deck Galaxy and heard about it, I thought this is just going to be One Deck Dungeon with a couple minor improvements. But I actually found it to be quite a bit different. So One Deck Dungeon, pretty straightforward game. You have 4 cards laid out on the table. You have a handful of dice based on your character and maybe some upgrades you've done to it. You roll, you choose which of those 4 cards you're going to go in battle. You roll the dice. You see if you can match them up to the slots. If you win, you get a benefit. You take that card, you slot it under your character card and get some upgrades, some additional ability or experience points. And then if you lose, then you take some negative. Usually it's going to be time, which is going to be discarding cards off the top of the deck. The time in this game is managed by the deck of cards that you've got. So really almost everything you got is some cards and this deck of, some dice and this deck of cards. So One Deck Galaxy does use some of the same mechanisms. It uses the deck as your time, your clock, as to when this game is going to escalate or when it's going to end. But it also uses that dice mechanism where you're going to be rolling dice and trying to slot them into different spots. What changes quite a bit, though, is that you have a nemesis, kind of a major villain that is going to be having effects on you every turn during the game. And that's there at the start of the game. So you're going to be dealing with kind of this extra effect every time. You also have a star base kind of card that lets you move dice to just get extra benefits. Some of them are going to be these little rocket ships, essentially going to allow you to re-roll dice or use them for other effects. And then these science tags that will be used for some other effects. So the star base kind of lets you dump your unneeded dice and get some benefits from it. And then the other thing that really changes here, and what I think really makes the biggest difference, is the pacing of the game. When you're dealing with these 4 cards that are laid out on the table, as well as there's going to be another card laid next to this nemesis you're dealing with, you don't have to choose one per turn. You're going to roll this big handful of dice, and you're going to be able to kind of choose where you put your dice. But if you don't manage all of the spaces on one of the cards in a turn, that's okay. The dice stay there. You're going to deal with them in the next turn. So the pacing changes quite a bit. It turns it into a little bit more of an epic, kind of, I have this big problem to deal with. I'll deal with different parts at different times. And it's just a much different puzzle than One Deck Dungeon was. So for me, that was the biggest thing that really changed. It changed the pacing. It changed the kind of the speed of the game, and it changed the complexity of the game to some extent. So I'll stop there after that description. Let's hear what Adam and Chris thought about their early plays of One Deck Galaxy.
Well, frustration, to sum it up in one word. From getting out the rule book, opening up the game, I was excited, and then I started looking and I'm trying to figure out how to set it up. Show me a picture of how should I set this thing up on my table so I can get all the components and I can read through the rule book and follow along the steps and see how that goes. So there wasn't really a clear picture of how to set that up in the rule book. And then there wasn't an explanation for a lot of the icons. There's these little, now I understand that they're fleet icons, these little rocket ships that are on the star race. I'm looking for that in the rule book, and I look for like an appendix or anywhere. I don't think there's anywhere in that rule book that says this is a fleet. You kind of have to deduce it from going through, and you have to put the pieces together by yourself. Anyway, I call up Tim, say, what the heck's going on here? How do I get going on this thing? And so he gave me some pointers. And then to his credit, Chris Cheslick he was on our Twitter feed and said, hey, I have a live video. Go check this out. That helped out a bunch to see how to get things going and how to move around. And he's been all over Board Game Geek answering a lot of questions because I'm not the only one with questions about the rulebook here. So the rulebook was tough. All right. But, I could see the potential for the game. It looked fun. I want to be able to check out all these little planets. The cards just look cool. There's a planet. There's these little slots for the different colored dice. You have to meet these little requirements, figure out this little dice puzzle. Yeah, that seems cool. I want to do that. Oh, now I have to take these cards and slot them underneath, count the influence here, and put some science tokens on this side of the thing and some science tokens over, and not even tokens, it's another card you have to slot underneath the star base. For Dark Star guys, you have to slot another science card under this other card that's out there. And you have to slot influence all around 5 or 6 different cards in this game. You're slotting cards under them. So that was frustrating. I think Chris has more to talk about there. So I'll just pause for a second and I'll turn this over to Chris because maybe he'll pick me back up.
Ooh, okay. Well, I'm probably not going to give you much of a pickup here, but let me go back to the instructions for a minute. I had the same frustration that you did, Adam. And I feel like there were things, like basic things that you needed to do in this game that just were not covered in the instructions. And I did watch a video, it might be in the same video that you watched, and I felt like that did answer all those questions. But that's a real problem if you can't refer back to your instruction manual in order to play a game. If you have to keep going back to a video to find your answers. And I did have to do that a couple times, and that drove me a little bit nuts. Now, the tucking. Oh, man. That was literally almost killed the game for me because there is so much tucking going on that I literally each card you have these major cards that you have things like your character and your star base and the villain, your nemesis. Every single one of those, you're tucking cards on all sides. Like on your character, on the left side, you tuck cards to add in more resource development. You tuck cards under the bottom to add technologies. You tuck cards on the right to add science points. And you're tucking multiple cards. So I had one game where I was like 6 cards deep on technologies. And so every time I was doing that, especially if I was tucking a card on a different side, I'm trying to like gently lift this thing up just enough to slide the card underneath so that I'm not screwing up the 6 technology cards I have down at the bottom and get them all twisted and whopper-jawed so that you can't read them anymore. And it drove me crazy. I actually found myself making decisions that would not require me to tuck a card because I'm like, oh, I just can't stand tucking another card right now. And that's a problem. Now, I will say I played a second game with a neoprene mat underneath, and I also played a part of that game with a felt mat, and it made a huge difference. It didn't solve all the problems, and the tucking was still frustrating. There's still too much of it, but at least it made it mildly tolerable. So the tucking, I don't know. I have a hard time getting past that, and I have other things to say about it too, but I'll pass it back to you guys if you have more you want to say about the tucking.
Well, yeah, I will talk about the tucking. Let me start with the rule book first of all. I think one of the challenges with this rule book, and I actually played another game recently that had the same issue, is that this is in a small box, and so the rule book, the pages don't have a lot on each page, and this is a problem. I think this rule book, for the most part, the problem could have been solved by having this be an 8-page rule book where when you're kind of referring to certain things, all the illustrations are on the page for many steps of the game. But because you had to flip through 8 pages to go back to reference the layout of the card and the specific terminology that was used on and everything, it was a very challenging game to learn from the rule book. And I learned it 100% from the rule book. I didn't watch any videos or anything like that. And so I think that's just kind of a challenge with putting it in a small box and having a reasonably complex game, is that you can't really fit all the information in a really usable way. But there was another major problem with the rulebook, and that is that there was literally an important mechanism, the star base in this game, that did not explain at all how to use it. There's some iconography that showed how to use it on the card, but it wasn't understandable by me at all. And so that really hurt my first experience, my first play of it. I just was like, I don't even know what to do here. Now, again, Chris says like identified, he recognized on our Twitter feed, hey, we caught this in play testing and it didn't make it into the final layout of the rule book. And so that's sucks for them, because I bet they're going to be dealing with a lot of complaints, a lot of questions about this, and a lot of people that try to play it the first time and just won't get it played because of a mistake in printing. And that's frustrating. They do have an FAQ. So if you're playing this game for the first time, go check out that FAQ. Make sure that you've got it available to you when you're trying to play through the game in the first time, because it answers some very important questions. So yeah, a couple misses with the rulebook. Now the tucking, I played my first game on my game table, which has a cloth surface. And the tucking is a little bit fiddly, but it was not bad. Like, I'm sliding cards in, it all worked fine. And Chris texts me, he's like, how can you even play this game like this? And so I intentionally went and I played it on my wood table the next day, and it was almost unplayable. So definitely strongly recommend that if you have a flat surface, a wood table, then use some kind of cloth underneath this, and it will make it a lot better, even though it still is a little bit fiddly. But I played my third game, kind of with that information. I went back to my game table, played my third game. It didn't bother me at all. There is a couple quick tricks. If you've got the game surface, instead of tucking the cards underneath them, just kind of stack them right on top, right above the card or next to it that you're going to be using, and you can still see the icons that would matter. You don't have to lift up the card and tuck it. So that was an easy workaround, but you have to have a little bit more space to do that, and it's not the perfect ideal, but it worked just fine for me. So Definitely, those are the two frustrations. But that said, let me jump in and talk about why you're tucking all these cards. Now, again, I told you that cards are the timer in this game. As you move through the deck, and usually the big nemesis is going to make you discard cards off the deck. But the other way that cards leave the deck is by using them as influence, which you're going to tuck under various cards. And so every decision you're making has to do with, do I want to do this thing because it is going to shorten the deck? It's going to mean that the deck reshuffles and triggers a negative effect from the nemesis and pushes me closer to the end game sooner than I want to. And that's what it is trying to do. That's what that influence mechanism does. So, I can understand why they use this, but I 100% wish that if it weren't for that purpose, that the influence was tracked in any other way. A different colored dice, some little tokens, anything like that would have made it a lot easier to work with. But I think it's, kind of, again, it's driven by the fact that your game clock is based on this deck of cards and how quickly you get through it.
Yeah, I think the concept is great that you have to use these cards and no more than 1 or 2 influence per every card. You have to grab one of these from the deck and associate it with one of the actions you're trying to do or one of the planets you're trying to influence. I think that concept's great. Just in practice, just frustrating. To counter one of your points too, Age of Galaxy comes in a teeny tiny box, and you've got the rule book there. No difficulty understanding that rule book and getting going. Cafe, also a tiny box, pretty easy to understand those rules. I don't think you can use the excuse of a small box for a jacked up rule book. That's unfortunate that they did leave a chunk out of the rule book there. That's pretty rough. So concept is great. Am I ever going to play this when I have all these other great games that don't require me to make change with influence with cards and have to spin this card around so it's now 1 influence instead of 2 influence? I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Age of Galaxy, Adam, because that's a game that I felt suffered from the small box treatment. And it's a game that, after having played it a couple times now, I think our first play, I was really unimpressed. The second play, I started kind of coming along with it and appreciating what the game had. Although I still thought that it was a little bit, it wasn't something you could really capture in a small box game, although it did a reasonably good job for the size that it had and the production that it had. I think that One Deck Galaxy just doesn't cross the finish line on that one. I feel like it's trying to do a lot of stuff, and a lot of these things, I mean, they are clever. They're cool ideas, like, the influence concept, which ended up being frustrating with the tucking, but it's a cool concept. And the deck getting, drawing down the deck as your passage of time. That's really clever. But in the end, I just never felt like I was in the middle of a big epic story, which is really what this game is trying to do, I think. Age of Galaxy made me feel more like that, and this game just doesn't. I mean, I'm rolling a bunch of dice and then putting them on cards, and in the end, sadly, because I really wanted to like this game, I just felt like I was left with a bunch of fiddly cards and some not particularly interesting decisions to make. I played 2 games of it. The first game I played and felt pretty down on it, so I feel like I got to at least play a second game before I'm, feel comfortable saying negative things about it. But I played the 2 games that I played 2 different characters or 2 different races. I played 2 different villains, and I felt like I won both of them without really putting any thought into it. Now, maybe I was doing some rules wrong, but there were a ton of these little micro rules in this game that I felt like they were very difficult to keep track of, all the little this and that, and this card lets you do that, and this technology lets you do that. So it's very possible too that I was forgetting something. But if I was, the reason is because there's a bunch of stuff in there that was very easy to forget. So overall, I wish that I liked this game a lot more than I did. It does, well, on the pod, I do want to say something positive about it because I don't think it's all negative. It has a great sense of humor. The art is terrific on this game. It's funny. The commentary, the rule book is actually pretty amusing. I think that if you can get by the other pieces, or if the other pieces don't bother you, there's actually some fun to be had here. It just didn't hit for me.
Yeah, let me speak to the art for a second. Just again, one more comparison to One Deck Dungeon, and that is that I really enjoyed when I would be going through One Deck Dungeon that every card you turned over was going to be a new monster, a new creature, a new trap that you had to get past. And I would say that I was a little disappointed that most of the cards that you're flipping over are just planets. Now
Yeah.
there are some interesting ones, like there's this floating burger joint.
Starburger.
There's some other cool kinds of planets and things like that, but they're just planets. It's less about encountering different types of creatures, and that was just a little bit less interesting for me from an art and thematic perspective. But I did like the art overall, and what I really did like was the story that the nemesis, again, I forget the name of it. I think there's some other name, but the what the main bad guys told. If you read a little bit of there's a little extra booklet that comes that kind of explains each of them and gives a little backstory on them, and I thought they were clever, and I didn't have an easy time beating these. I only won one of them. I won the easiest one, the 1 star or the 1 pip villain. But it was a very close game for me. And that was a tough game, and it was very challenging, and I felt like the whole time just under pressure. The other two villains that I went against, I did lose against. So I didn't find it an easy experience. But I did find it unique. Every time you play one of these nemesis differently, they are very different experiences, and I thought they were very interesting experience. And that is one thing that I think was a big plus compared to One Deck Dungeon, where One Deck Dungeon, you're basically playing the same game every turn. You eventually get to the major villain, and they're just a tougher puzzle. This one really gave you some unique situations, a unique puzzle to play around every game. The characters had unique abilities, and then you had this little kind of like side card, if you're a civilization card or whatever. You had to unlock these different federation levels, and so you had to meet unique goals, and those play very differently. Like the way you play is going to change drastically based on those. I thought that was great. I thought the character abilities were great. I thought the tech was great. I thought the almost everything mechanically that this game did differently from One Deck Dungeon was great if you're looking for a more complex experience. When I got my shipping notice, I moved One Deck Dungeon to my sell shelf because I thought this is going to replace One Deck Dungeon. This is the new upgraded version of it. These are two different games, even though they use some of the same mechanisms. And so I moved One Deck Dungeon back to my game shelf. And I think both of these are good for me. Now, Chris and Adam didn't enjoy their plays or didn't feel like it's worth going back to. I have to admit, I put a lot more effort into the first game to learn this game than I feel like I should have or that I wanted to. But now that I know it, I was thinking about it, and I set it up 3 days in a row to play an hour and a half long solo game. And that is not something I do often. And I think that this still, for a solo experience for me, is still a good game. It's still a good hit. And it's something that I want to keep going back to. They have a really cool campaign booklet in this game too, where essentially you would set up with, character and a villain or whatever. And if you win it, then you kind of follow this track. It's kind of like a roll and write pad where you've got a pad of 25 unique sheets. And the first one, if you win the first game, you would move over to a space and you'd get a benefit, an ongoing benefit for your civilization. But then you would have to remove at least the villain or the character or one or the other, the civilization you play with, and then you have to kind of play with a unique combination of those things every time you go through this campaign. And every time you kind of proceed through the campaign, you get a little bit stronger. So I can't wait to play through one of those and just kind of go through it and like figure out the puzzle and see how well I do. They of course have scoring for that campaign to see how well you do with it. I think there's a lot of gameplay in here if you can struggle through the learning it. I think it's a really great game. I really had fun with it. I'm going to be going back to it for sure. Like now that I know how to play it, I'm looking forward to going back to it. Adam called me up yesterday. He's like, Tim, I'm struggling with this. How does this even work? So I was like, let's get on a phone call. And I got on a call and I looked at this Nemesis that I'd never played before. And I'm reading through and I was like, oh, this looks really cool. So I'm getting all enthusiastic and telling Adam all about it. So like for me, this game did pay off. It wasn't quite what I expected. So if you're expecting in a One Deck Dungeon, if you've played that before, it's not quite the same. It's a little different. And you may have to rely on some other resources other than the rule book to really get this down quickly. And those are frustrations for sure. Play on a soft surface. All that to be said, I'm going to keep it. I like it. I thought it was a pretty good game for me.
Adam, you keeping it or is it going to the sell shelf?
I don't know. I gotta give it a few more chances and see if I can get over this tucking and find some new ways to track this stuff with some cards over the side and see what else is out there. I feel like the concepts are amazing. Like I said, I want to be able to explore this game, but I don't know how often am I going to have time for a 90-minute solo session when there's other options out there. For now, I'm going to keep it around, try it a couple more times, see if I can get into it. but I would not be surprised if it's moving on to somebody's warmer home in a few months. What about you, Chris?
I feel like I need to give it one more chance, probably in the context of the campaign mode that Tim mentioned. I'm really hoping that's going to spice it up a little bit, or maybe something will click. Basically, I mean, I want to justify in my own mind the money that I spent on this. But, the 2 games that I played of it so far took me about 3 days to get through them because I kept stopping to do other things because I just couldn't stay engaged in it. And that's not a good sign. So I have a feeling it's probably headed for the sell shelf.
Since you did mention the money we spent on it, I did want to mention, so there was 2 options when we backed this Kickstarter. There was the retail version, which was like $25. And then there was the deluxe version, which was $40. And I think all 3 of us ended up backing the deluxe version. So the deluxe version had 2 differences. The cards are all this plastic. The cards are awesome material, but I don't think they help the sliding. And I think that if they had been more traditional cards, that actually would have been less of an issue. So I think the plastic cards probably made that a little bit worse when you're playing on a flat surface. The second was they gave you these little upgraded plastic tokens to replace the cardboard tokens in the game. And they're fine. Like they're little black plastic tokens with like some sparkly color on the top.
Here's what I don't like about those, Tim. The one side has the color and the other side's black. If all these things are upside down, you're screwed. You're like, oh, where's the 4 red tokens? You got to flip all these things over. Okay, here they are. I imagine the other ones are just chits with the matching colors on both sides.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I don't think, having experienced the game now, I don't think I would have paid the extra $15 for it. I knew that when I backed it too. I was like, do I really want to pay an extra $15? This is a $25 game. This is not a $40 game. But then I was a dummy and I spent the extra $15 on it. I think unfortunately, because the plastic cards probably made it a little bit even harder to use, that was definitely a bad choice. But I also just wasn't blown away by the tokens. They're a little weird. They've got almost like a glitter kind of surface on the top. They didn't feel as premium, I guess, as I was expecting them to. My daughter loved them. Like she walked up on my table, she's like, "Ooh, these are great, Dad. I love these." So I would personally have just bought the retail, and I think I would have been just as happy, or maybe even happier with that. That was my experience with the components and the cost. That will wrap up this episode. If you enjoy the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, but rate us on the audio quality of the second half of the show and not on the first half of the show. That'd be great. Thank you. Otherwise, until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.